I think because one of the things that's most important to me in this birth is just being able to be present and almost enjoy it and experience it more. It's in those moments where I imagine just like sitting outside thinking like life is just so awesome. That's kind of where I'm at with that birth vision and the feeling that I want.
This is a Journey to Birth podcast coaching session. I'm Tristan, the creator of the Natural Birth Compass online childbirth education program. And on this series, you will hear me help Starre, one of our Natural Birth Compass program students, preparing for her second birth after unexpected events required some changes in her first birth. A couple of notes before we jump in. This is my second coaching call with Starre. In this call, you will hear us talk through some specific aspects of her birth based on her Natural Birth Compass strengths and challenges, and view how she can start to prepare for her upcoming birth using her strengths, and how to recognize her challenges so that she can start to prepare for them now. We will also discuss how she and her husband can use their combined strengths to work together more successfully in this birth. If you missed our first coaching call, I strongly recommend that you go back and listen to it before listening to this episode. Now, if you're ready, I hope you enjoy sitting in on this call as we help Starre on her journey to birth. Hello, Starre. Welcome back. It's so nice to see you again for our second coaching session on the Journey to Birth podcast.
Hi, it's so good to be back. I'm so excited.
So in our first coaching session, you had the chance to share your birth story. So we all learned what happened in that first birth, the birth that you planned as a home birth and ended up having to transfer to the hospital. And for our listeners, if you haven't heard Starre's birth story yet, I would encourage you to go back to that episode and listen to the full story. But just to catch you up, if you want to stay here and listen on this episode, and even for those who were here for that story, just to give us a quick refresher, I'm just going to recap quickly what your birth was like, Starre, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you had planned a home birth with a midwife, but after having several days of steady but not intense contractions, and then finally having your water break where you saw all that meconium and discussing it with your midwife about considering the possibility of possibly transferring, you eventually decided to err on that side of safety and transfer to the hospital. And now I do want to point out at this point, just a little bit of foreshadowing for our coaching session today is that you found that you were a little bit stuck in the idea of having that home birth to the point where you hadn't really prepared for the case of a transfer. That wasn't really in your scope of vision for your birth. So you still had to pack your bag and figure out which hospital to go to. And then get your husband and yourself had to get ready to go and make that happen. But that being said, none of what you were experiencing while you were still at home in that birth was anything that was in an emergency state. So you definitely had time to make all those arrangements and get the preparations done.
Yes.
And then you arrive at the hospital. So your midwife had arranged for you guys to have an OB that she recommended to come and attend your birth, even though he was not on call that day. So you found that presented a little bit of challenge, kind of one of your first challenges in negotiating with the hospital to have the OB that you selected rather than using the on-call doctor.
Yeah.
But your midwife and your husband kind of handled that negotiation. You were feeling just ready to move on with things after 4 or 5 days of labor at this point.
Yes.
And then, so before you left the hospital, you had your water break. And at that point, you did find that your contractions had started picking up in both frequency and intensity.
Yes.
But then as you transferred to the hospital, you felt like there was a little bit of stalling in that progression and started feeling a bit stuck again.
Yes. I mean, they just stayed very much where they were.
At the time you arrived at the hospital?
Yes.
Okay. And then
for quite a while.
Yeah. Okay. And then you were feeling like you were struggling a little bit more with also the pain of the contractions and just managing your contractions in your labor at that point, even though you mentioned that the car ride, which is what everybody thinks of as being the most difficult part, that wasn't really that uncomfortable for you in comparison to getting into the hospital.
Mhm.
And in fact, you even said in that last episode that crossing that threshold of the hospital, you felt like that affected your psyche, and like it was giving you the feeling of some loss of control. You have trouble when things don't go according to the plan that you had. Being flexible and making that transition for you in all kinds of ways can be very difficult. And
Mhm.
in this particular case, you felt like you were running away from the pressure of the contractions, which was making it more difficult to manage them.
Yes.
Okay. And then your midwife comes back and she was able to kind of help you work out some ways to get back in control. I think
Mhm.
it sounds like one of the key things that she did was get you into that shower where you felt like you maybe had your safe space and felt like you could
Yes.
control things more there. And once you had that control back, that's when you were finally able to kind of let your body do what it needed to do. And
Yeah.
so it sounded like from your story that seemed like the piece that finally kind of pivoted your birth into more active labor and really brought your baby down so you could get to the pushing stage.
Mhm.
And then you mentioned also in your birth story that you felt like pushing was the part of your labor that really was the best part for you. And I want to go a little bit more into
Mhm.
this first to see if you can pinpoint for me
Okay.
what it was about the pushing that really had you feeling that way.
That is a great question.
It's common. This is a common thing
Yeah.
for women to either feel like this was the best part for them or one of the worst parts for them.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit curious
Yeah.
what you think it was. I have some ideas that I'll share with you, but
And when it comes to the pushing, it's funny that you say some people say it's like the worst, because I hear moms talk about like pushing for hours and how awful it was and how exhausted they were. And I tell people all the time, I'm so thankful that that wasn't my experience when it came to pushing. I think for me, there's a couple things. I think number one was just like the euphoria of, oh my gosh, this is happening. We made it through all of that. I had that period where like in the middle of the afternoon where I genuinely was like, I just don't know if I can do this. This is way more than I thought I was signing up for. And so I think I just had this great sense of like accomplishment that I got there, and now all I had to do was push the baby out. I also think that in a sense it was the easiest part because I felt like my body was doing what it needed to do instead of me like fighting what it was trying to do. Because so much of my labor, I just was not prepared for the sensations I was feeling, and I didn't like them and I ran away from them. And so I think because I allowed myself to be in the moment and like, okay, here we are, I get to push my baby out. And I was so excited that that's probably why I associate it as the best part. And then also pushing was, I don't want to say easy because it's not like, oh my gosh, it was easy to push a baby out. But to me, pushing was the easiest part from when my water broke pretty much until I had Virginia. That was the easiest part. I remember, contractions on top of contractions on top of contractions just being so horrible. And I don't remember anything about that being horrible.
there's a couple of things about getting to this point of pushing that's really going to bring about some power for you. One is that a lot of women, especially women who tend toward this east strength,
Mm-hmm.
because you actively feel like you're doing something. Again, like you're the
Yes.
one controlling because you're putting effort into the pushing. Where the earlier
Mm-hmm.
part of labor and the active part of labor before you get to pushing, your body's kind of doing what it needs to do, and you have to let go of the control. And for an
Mm-hmm.
East person, control is really important. You're used to that being kind of a primary force in your life of having a plan, being able to control a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that you value. So the early part of labor for people in East can be really difficult because you have to really practice letting go of that and just allowing your body to do
Mm-hmm.
it. without trying to think about it, without using your brain, without using kind of control. But when you get to the pushing, you can physically increase the amount of pushing that you're doing. Now you don't have to. Some women just choose to not actively push and just allow their body to birth their baby, and that works too. Whatever works best in the situation is absolutely fine for that part. But for somebody who's an east, that part is going to give you back that feeling of control. So you're going to feel more in your strength and you're going to feel more of your power at that point. The other thing, now, as you've jumped into the first part of the course, you've seen a bit about the compass now and how it's a cycle.
Yeah.
So the thing behind the compass is really a cycle. So we have all of these pieces. The east leads into the south, leads into the west, leads into the north. So all of these pieces have to move in this particular order. And so labor, you'll find when you get into the later portions of the course, you'll see where different parts of birth fit on that compass as well. So active labor is actually more in the east, because east is about all of the movement and the activity. And it's really the whole idea of the east is essentially birth. If we look at it seasonally, it's the spring. So it's when everything is coming back into life. We have new sprouts, we have baby animals, all of those, kind of the rebirth out of the winter hibernation stage. So the whole energetic is that kind of bringing new things into being. So we have overall east is birth. Within labor, east is more early and active labor. Pushing is the very end of east and moving into the south. So that's where that accomplishment piece comes. And you'll see when you get further on in the course, where are different emotions when they're working properly, where those different emotions really support birth. So for east, being too controlling can really make things feel stuck and can inhibit the body being able to open up. So going from east to south is going from spring to summer. So spring is the rebirth and things just starting to unfurl. And summer is all of the flowers are open, the bees are out, the days are long, just being able to completely let go. So for you, getting from that feeling stuck and finally that opening and you being able to get to that point of being able to push the baby out gives you control, but it also got you past that stuck point where you didn't feel like you were really able to allow your body to open. And when it finally did, and you made it, you were in the whole next stage of things. And so, you've released that sticking point. So that gives you that feeling of accomplishment that you can then use toward pushing the baby out. So a couple of other things about that transition from being in the active labor to pushing, you specifically mentioned of where you feel like you had more power in that stage, was allowing yourself to be in the moment, which is something that we're going to talk about for you being an east and the planner who's always thinking a little bit ahead instead of just being with the here and now. That's going to be something that's important for you to embody during labor, during the earlier parts of labor, so that you can have that power throughout and not just when you get to the pushing stage. And then the part where you felt like in your active labor, where you were not prepared for the sensations that you were actually feeling, that's a big flag for that planning thing. Like anything that you hadn't pre-planned for made you kind of turn around and run away.
Yeah. I think it's funny that you talk about me being able to be present in the pushing when I really struggled with it the rest of my labor, because I'm always planning one step ahead. But I think the reason that I was able to be more present when I was pushing is because I didn't know what to plan. Like I had only planned through they hand me a baby. Like I'd never had a kid before. So it's funny that you say that, because I think like my plan ran out. So then I could just enjoy being there, because it was like, okay, well then they hand me the baby and then I'm not sure what happens. So we're at the end of the plan.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What happens when you haven't planned for that far?
Yeah.
So given that feeling, you hadn't really planned to transfer to the hospital. So while you were getting ready for that, what were the primary emotions that were coming up for you at that point?
So I'm really interesting in that I love to have a plan. And if you ask me about something that is any farther than the next couple of hours, I instantly will try to plan it. But I'm very impromptu if you ask me in the moment to do something and it isn't interrupting a plan I already had. So, for example, my husband is always asking to have like friends and family over for dinner. And the thought of figuring out what to make and cleaning the house and getting everything ready is stressful to me. So I put off like actually scheduling it. But I'll be in the middle of making dinner or starting dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm like, oh, you should text your parents and see if they already started dinner. They could totally come over. So I'm very much like, if it works for something impromptu to join my plan, then I'm fine with it. And so I think I was just so excited that my water had finally broken and that meant the baby was coming, that I was just excited. I honestly was not scared to go to the hospital. I thought the whole thing was kind of fun. Like the excitement and energy of all of it. I thought it was kind of funny, even down to like my water had broken, so I'm leaking all sorts of stuff at this point. So I remember sitting in my kitchen chair as we're trying to leave, and my midwife putting a adult diaper on me and dressing me and putting shoes on me. And I remember thinking the whole thing was just funny. And I think because there was just so much excitement and I didn't know what to think or plan for, I just didn't think about it. I didn't think about like, okay, we're going to the hospital, and that's as far as my thoughts had gone, which is why it was hard when there was just so much unexpected. I mean, I walked into a hospital I've never set foot in before. Just, so many things like that. It was just so unfamiliar. I kind of feel like that's where I was.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the idea of being stuck at these points of things changing, but even before, so even in your early labor where things kind of stalled out. So where that early labor stalled and had you stuck with those contractions every 5 minutes apart. So we're going to talk probably next time about some exercise components and nutrition components that can help strengthen you physically, because one of the things that East people can also struggle with is really nourishing yourself in all kinds of ways. So that can be the physical, as far as making sure that you're feeding yourself really well with the right kinds of foods that are really needed and getting enough. Sometimes it's just knowing how much you really should be eating of certain kinds of foods that will give your uterus the proper nutrients that it needs to subsist during labor and be able to build up and progress the way that it should. So we can go over some of that, and then the breathing exercises and things that I'll have you do that will help just ensure positioning is good and the muscles are getting the right workout that are going to help throughout that part of the labor as well. But also, nourishing yourself mentally and emotionally. East people are not always so good at taking time out because of that not really being present thing. You can't really nourish yourself mentally when you're so focused on planning what's coming next and making sure that everything that everybody needs. I mean, you have that reality, right? You're a mom.
Right.
So you do have this little person and family that you need to ensure that everybody is healthy and safe and all of the needs are being met. But you also need to make sure that you're nourishing yourself on all of those levels so that, one, you can be the best mom that you can be because you're taking care of yourself. Two, that will help you get into the stage that comes before the East, which is the North. So we need that North to be nice and bolstered up, because that's what's going to provide the support for the East to open up. And the North is all about replenishing, restoring. It's the winter, it's the hibernation, it's the night. So it's getting proper sleep so that we're restoring the body's energy, we're restoring the mind by refreshing it, the best you can. Of course, I know you have a 2-year-old who may not sleep through the night every night, and then you're pregnant. So
yes,
that disrupts things. So your sleep may not be an 8-hour chunk at night, but focusing on restoring your body that way. And then whatever you need to do for you, whatever you enjoy that helps restore and replenish you mentally and emotionally, whether that's going for walks or reading, whatever it is for you, that helps you get into that place where you can just calm the mind. Starting to kind of focus on that north point. And the big thing with the north point on the compass is really just being in the moment. Like when we're asleep, there's nothing else going on. I mean, being asleep as a mom of toddlers and infants is a little bit different because you're never fully asleep. But the idea generally outside of those times of our life is when we're asleep, our eyes are closed. We don't really hear anything. We're not engaging with anything in the outside. We're not actively thinking. We're not making plans. We're just in that moment, finding a way to get into that stage where, you're not necessarily feeling like you have to connect with everything in the external environment. Some people like yoga, meditation. There's a lot of different options. I'm trying to work something in daily if possible, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day, that you can separate yourself from everything and just work on being in the present moment and not thinking about the future. So that you get comfortable with that feeling. So then by the time your labor gets here, you've trained your mind to be okay with it. Be okay with not thinking about what time do I need to start dinner, or how much laundry is there left to do, or what's the schedule for today? What time do we have to be out of the house, and all of those things.
Yes.
So an image that I want to put into your mind to kind of think about what it means to be a healthy east versus a stuck east, because your east tends to get stuck. One way that we describe it is to think about it as being bamboo, healthy growing bamboo. One of the things about it is when there's wind, bamboo can be very flexible. The wind is a change in the normal state of things, and often it's sudden. Everything is calm, and then the wind starts. Bamboo has the flexibility to just go with it, to be with whatever state of wind is coming. And then when the wind stops, it stands up straight again as if nothing happened. It's not affected by the fact that there was wind. When east gets stuck, it becomes more like a piece of lumber that's been cut and milled, and it's very solid. And if you go and put that in the ground and throw a big windstorm at it, it can crack and snap and break. It doesn't have that flexibility that healthy bamboo has. So we want to have you be like the bamboo, where when things come that cause you to have to shift a little bit, you can be open to being flexible and move away from being a piece of lumber that's very straight and very perfect, but not able to kind of flex if things need to change and go with the moment. If we can continue to work on getting you into that bamboo state, by the time you get to your labor, you can be really flexible instead of having inflexible plan that how things are going to go, that if it doesn't go that way, the lumber ends up snapping. We don't want snapping. Another thing I wanted to go over is so since we spoke last time and looked a little bit at what happened in that birth and where those points were that you felt like you were getting stuck, and the fact that you're the planner type of personality, how that may have played a role in some of those particular areas where you got stuck. And then now that you've jumped into the course a little bit, what are you noticing about your reactions to control? Are you noticing when you're doing it or starting to become more aware of it?
It's funny that you asked that, because yes, I have noticed a change. I've noticed a slowing down and definitely an awareness, but I really noticed it with my daughter just in the last several days, being able to be very present with her instead of me powering through and picking up the living room and vacuuming it when she wants to do something. Being like, okay, if you want to read books, let's sit down and read books. Or the other day, she really wanted me to go on her rocking horse. I was trying to do the dishes. So I said, okay, mommy's going to set a timer and I'll come play with you in 3 minutes. And so I set a timer and I literally did 3 minutes worth of dishes, which made me feel like I accomplished something. But ultimately, it's helped me realize that my plans generally are based around things that don't need to happen. And it's okay if I prioritize something that really is of more value. My daughter's going to be one for another month and a half. And that's so fleeting. And so being able to just be present and enjoy that now, that's one thing that I've definitely noticed just in the last week, actually. And being okay with it instead of like this constant struggle of, I know I need to enjoy hanging out with you, but I was trying to do all of these things. So that's been really cool, actually.
Great. I am so happy to hear you say that, because that's exactly where we need to go. And that's, that's the bamboo. So you're already getting there, and that's starting to already harness some of that north perspective. So you are already kind of naturally bringing that in just from reviewing your birth story and noticing where these things have happened to you repetitively in all aspects of your life, right?
Yeah.
It comes out so much in the way that birth happens because everything's amplified in birth. Those specific traits that impact certain ways that you handle yourself in life that you've used as a way to get through different things in your life, and then they become patterns and habits. When you get to something as extreme as birth, that's when we can see it all come out. If we haven't had the chance to reflect on it and sort it out, the fact that you're already able to see that and make those changes, I expect it's going to make this second birth feel so much different for you. You're going to feel completely, I don't want to say more control, because that's not really what we're going for. But I think you're trying to control the early and the active labor made it so that it was actually out of your control. So in your way of being able to be present with it and let go of control, you're actually going to have more control. You're going to be able to be present enough that you're going to know what you need to do if anything like that happens again.
Yeah.
And this other aspect of what can exhaust people who are East, and what I think you are experiencing in that labor, is the sheer, like what you've probably been doing with your daughter as well, that can lead to a state, not exhaustion, but just fatiguing. And the second pregnancy and labor at risk of having this similar labor pattern where you can't quite ramp up to the full active labor is just feeling like you always have to finish everything. You have to do everything that you think needs to be done, everything that you have planned. And you, people who are really strong East, that they will just use sheer will and determination to fit it all in at the expense of their body's reserves. This is not a time to be doing that. Never really is it a time to be doing that, as you mentioned. The things that you feel like you have planned out and that need to be done, there's priorities, and getting the full perspective, which is part of that north, of what's really truly important here. If the dishes sit here for the rest of the day, is anybody going to be harmed by that? No. Restructuring that and taking that pressure off of yourself that everything has to be, East, when they're far in their East struggles, it's the perfectionist type having to deal with how much control can take over their lives. So that's great that you are starting to see through that. And now a quick word from our sponsor. I want to tell you about two moms and their experience with their childbirth class. They both take a full series of childbirth courses. They both have birth partners who attend those courses. They both learn tools and techniques to manage their labor and birth. But only one of them is actually prepared to help herself during birth. Only one of them is actually confident in her communication tools. And only one of them is actually prepared for the nature of birth. How do I know? I was the mom who took a class, but wasn't prepared to help myself during birth after that class. I was the mom who didn't have the right communication tools. I was the mom who was caught off guard by the nature of birth. And now, because of what I learned from my experiences, my students like Jen and Maria and Susan, who took our online childbirth course, the Natural Birth Compass program, they are the ones who have the inner confidence and knowledge of birth to help themselves, to communicate clearly to their whole birth team, to set themselves up for being strong throughout birth, and to take control of decision-making throughout their birth. Want to know how you can have this level of inner confidence for yourself? Visit us at naturalbirthcompass.com, where you can read how Jen and Maria and Susan used their natural birth compass in their births, and prepare yourself to have the inner confidence you need no matter what path your birth takes. And now, back to your Journey to Birth podcast. Okay, so I want to start shifting the focus to your husband a little bit, and how the two of you will be able to work together in this birth a little bit more successfully, where you'll have him to help you with his strengths, and he can feel more confident in helping you this time around. You guys did a childbirth class before that birth?
Yes, we did.
And what did you feel like you or he were prepared for from that class? And where do you feel like things didn't prepare you?
I think that what we were most prepared for, or we thought, I thought was what to practically do through contractions. The class included going over the different stages of labor, and they did the ice in your hand thing. And there's a lot of, what I loved was we did a lot in that class where she had us practicing partner positions where they could help through contractions, which we did some of. But I think when we left the class, overall, we both felt like, okay, now we have some tools in our tool belt to help us get through the contractions. I really feel like that was the biggest thing. And I think from his perspective as well, I'm sure he probably learned a little bit more knowledge wise about the stages of labor and what they look like. Although I don't feel like my labor really matched a lot of what, like my contractions basically went from 5 minutes apart to a minute and a half apart. And they basically stayed at that for the next 10 hours. And so that really caught me off guard because I was like, this is supposed to be gradual. And they're supposed to be, they tell you, like 90 seconds apart at the end. And I remember them trying to fix my IV in the middle of the afternoon. And they had the phlebotomist in there, and she kept telling me, okay, well, tell me when the contraction's over. And I think because they knew I was only 4 centimeters dilated, and because I wasn't monitoring, like I didn't have monitors hooked up, she kept going in to try and do it. And I remember I kept telling her over and over again, it's not over, it's not over. And they were really close together, and they were really long for the whole time. And that totally caught me off guard too. I was like, it's not supposed to be like this, they're supposed to get longer and closer together. And really, I felt like I had 2 different kinds of contractions. I had my 5-minute apart ones, and I had my 90-second apart ones, and that was it. So I think that probably surprised him a little bit too, because we just expected it to be more gradual. And now that I've heard a lot more birth stories, I realize that's a great idea, but it doesn't necessarily happen like that for a lot of people. But in your classes, and our class was awesome. It was taught by a doula. We really loved the doula, but it makes it sound for a planner, it's perfect. You're like, okay, and so then here it'll be 2.5 minutes and the contraction will be 45 seconds. And so that was very surprising. I guess to kind of come back around, I think what we both walked away really was with, okay, we can try these positions and these different movements when I'm in labor. I only remember doing one thing we learned from the class. And that was while we were waiting for my midwife to come back. I think I mentioned this when I spoke with you on the last session, where I had one leg up kind of on the couch, and we were face to face, and we were just kind of rocking side to side, and I was able to support myself or kind of put my weight on him, and he supported me. And that's the only thing I honestly think that we used from our 8-hour childbirth class. It made us feel really confident. Like I remember leaving feeling excited. He was very engaged the entire class. I was actually really impressed and excited about how engaged he was, and really had kind of like his learning cap on. Like he was very present, which was cool. But when it came to the birth, I don't really feel like much of it prepared us for what we had to actually do.
Yeah, I do remember you saying the specific position that you guys used in labor with the leg on the couch thing, and thinking like, oh, that's from her class. And that was the only mention that I really noticed from something that sounds like it was from a childbirth class. That's pretty common. That was my experience with the class that we took before my first, that, yeah, you kind of end up coming out with this stuff to apply practically, but then if things don't go exactly as is laid out, then it's hard to know when and how to apply everything. And so I want to make sure that we have some things that are going to help you guys. So your husband filled out the assessment form, so now we know what direction he is. Can you share what his strengths are?
So he is a north, so he loves his recharge time, basically.
Yep, which is great because he can teach you all about how to do it. And once he really understands his north and your east, if he does this work along with you and goes through the course, he will see when you're being too much of an east, and he can coach you back into getting into your north, which is going to be really helpful for you. It's a really great combination that you two are going to be able to work off of one another really well. And as you're going through the process before the birth and even in early labor, you're going to be able to help him because of your East strengths of being the one who's comfortable being in control and kind of guiding people. The other thing about Easts is they can be good at guiding people because they naturally will take control of a situation if they need to. So helping him feel confident in doing that because they really love to learn things. They are they're very intellectually inclined, but they assume that everybody else knows what they know and is feeling the same things that they're feeling when in fact they're not. So things like the lidocaine situation where he just felt like if you didn't want it, you would have said something where you weren't really in the place to be able to say it. And he really wants to know, like all of his questions about feeling like he really needs to know where you are when you're having a baby. Like he wants to understand at that deep level because he's an internalizer, as most North people are. They're the more internal processors. Often they're more introverted than East and South people are. So he really wants to kind of get inside the situation and understand it from the inside out, which he won't be able to do fully because you can't. Even a woman to another woman can't really fully understand what labor experience was like for anybody else. We only can understand truly our own labors, but definitely even more challenging for a man who hasn't gone through it and can't go through it. But we can help him build his confidence in feeling comfortable taking control of the situation when you can't, because you will need him to be that voice for you, right? So that lidocaine situation where he felt like it wasn't what he wanted, he really didn't think it was what you wanted, but he also didn't feel the full confidence that he needed to intervene with the situation. Where the midwife was trying to, but since she's not really the care provider and she's not the spouse, he has more power than she does in that situation. So he needs to be able to walk into that power and say, this is not something that we want to have, or we want to talk about this before you apply whatever the intervention is. It's okay for him to do that, to speak up and be your voice and to hold that control position is okay for him to do. So the two of you talking through this beforehand is going to help give him the okay to do that and give him the confidence to move from the North into that East role in those times when you need him to do that. So encouraging him to go through the course along with you. The birth partner training video explains, it goes into a little bit of how different positions on the compass work together, but the bigger part of it is why it's important for them to do the course along with you and to also be evaluating themselves as they're going through the course. And the two of you talking together about, this is where I am. These are my strengths. So for you being the control person, your strength is in knowing what you want to happen, but your challenge is in letting go and allowing things to unfold the way that they need to unfold and being flexible in the plan and kind of getting out of your head. For your husband, his strength is in having a lot of the informational pieces. He just needs the confidence to be able to express it outwardly and be the voice when that is needed. So having him go through the course with you and doing some of his own work so he can see where those points are, by understanding that, he'll just naturally, in the way that you started to understand how your East strengths and challenges are affect your everyday life in little ways, right? Like doing the dishes versus playing with your daughter. It's not a big thing, but just seeing all of these little ways that start to compound. By him going through the course, he's going to be able to see that about himself and be able to use those strengths and challenges to support you, and then how the two East and North work together.
I'm eager to see how our conversations continue to unfold, because that seems to be what's giving us the most breakthrough, is how we kind of have a new thing to talk about, talk through it, and it's like, oh, okay. So just having that discovery and being able to move forward together and have a better understanding of each other and what labor looks like and preparing for it this time.
So you started the Natural Birth Compass Childbirth Education Program. How is the course going for you so far?
I thought it was really interesting when I was starting the notes on my birth vision, that one of those first worksheets, that the prompt is basically like, think of being able to like have your labor and your baby anywhere in the world, wherever it is, what would it be? And me being the planner that I am, all I can think of is the ideal situations of where I'm planning to have my birth. So that was really interesting to me. And I really spent a lot of time trying to think, okay, am I just thinking this way because this is where I'm picturing my birth? Or is this really what would be the most comfortable for me?
So when you're picturing it at the birth center that you're going to be at?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, it's really funny because there's 3 rooms there and I've seen all 3 of them. I had toured it with my last pregnancy, and then I've had 1 or 2 of my appointments already over there. And like the doors happened to be open when I was walking back, but didn't really like look into it. But there's 1 out of the 3 rooms even that I picture it being in. I really struggle with imagining things. If I can't picture it, I have a really hard time. I have really deep feelings like, oh, I want this feeling, but there's like 1 room out of the 3 that I imagine it being in. But there is an overlap in that the setting and the way they have the rooms there put together very much speaks to what makes me feel comfortable. So that's why I was really questioning myself. Are you imagining it this way because this is all you know and this is what you're planning? Or is it because you really would like that? And for me, having like a very clean but simple and cozy spa-like feeling, that's a very relaxed state. I have a hard time because I'm an East, and I would never have called it being an East prior to this, but I knew that it was because of the way my personality is. I have a very hard time relaxing, like very, very hard time relaxing. So for me, being in that kind of environment, like spas in general are very relaxing. They're very quiet. There's like soft, muted music. There's almost so little going on that you can't be distracted. Everything's clean, but it's fresh and bright and peaceful. And I think that's what I equate the birthing in to feel like. So I'm going to actually do another tour. We're going to go and walk through and talk with them more and be able to ask all our questions next month. I'm going to meet my midwife there for my next appointment. So I think that will help me kind of solidify because I'm scared I've like romanticized all of it in my mind. But that was really interesting to me that as I'm trying to think of like, okay, anywhere in the world, and that was the only place I could imagine is like a birthing center in Washington.
Well, if that is your ideal place, then that's perfect.
Yes.
You won't have to make any changes. But the idea behind the exercise is more not that you're necessarily going to birth in the place that you imagine, because most people, you being one of the exceptions maybe, are, they're going to be picturing like a beach in Hawaii or, some exotic place in the world. And people travel to, there's a place somewhere, I want to say in like the Mediterranean area where women go to birth with dolphins.
Really?
They go in the water and there's dolphins there and they go birth there. I don't remember exactly where it is, but people will travel to do that. It's not that the opportunity is not there to have any kind of birth you can imagine, but it's more of, the reality is you will be in the birth center and how, if you need to, and you may not need to, you may find that the birth center is so perfect for you already that you don't need to do anything for the environment. And that is definitely going to be more true of a place like a birth center versus a hospital.
Right.
Where if you are already intending to birth there, that's what you've arranged, or something comes up ahead of time that's going to require you to be in the hospital, that you know what kinds of things you want to have around you that are going to help you feel like you have the power of this birth, that it's your place and it's still the birth that you want to have. So if that means bringing certain things from home or getting things that you want to have in the room to kind of simulate that environment through bringing music in or bringing scented things in or certain pictures or whatever, linens, whatever things that you need to make you feel like you're in that place that you would love to be able to give birth in, that you can find pieces to bring in and give it that feeling. For you, since what makes you comfortable is that clean, spa, fresh feeling, most birth centers are generally arranged in that way already. So, you might not have to do a lot to create that environment, but things like if you want to have music, what kind of music, scents, things like that might still be applicable for you. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong if the birth center is what you imagine and that just feels that right to you. But I also want to give you permission to think outside of that if you want to.
And also I'm working really, really, really hard on not getting glued to this idea of what I think this birth is going to look like, because I could spell the whole thing out. One part about my daughter's birth that I loved was the timing of it. My water broke a little after 8 in the morning and she was born just after 7:37 at night. And I loved like the actual timing in the day of that. And so this baby, like I fully expect is coming in the evening. That's when I want to deliver you. So that's when you're coming. It was so nice not, like I slept the night before, and then I'm working really hard on allowing myself to think about what is ideal, but then realizing that might not happen is where I have a hard time with blurring those lines. I have this ideal situation. I mean, deep down, I know that ultimately my perfect ideal situation, detail by detail, is not going to happen. I mean, I'm having a baby. I don't get to plan the whole thing. But my tendency
Did you hear what you said there? I don't get to plan the whole thing.
Yeah, that's basically how I feel, is I don't get to. Because if I could, I would have, like a minute by minute breakdown of every little transition, even with my body and when we were there and what was happening. And so I'm really, really, really working on trying to let go of the fact that there could even be things that happen that mean we're at the hospital again. That could happen. And I'm like, I really don't want that to happen. And so part of me doesn't want to think about it. I don't ever want to think about what I don't want. My husband it's funny that you said they often are like intellectually inclined. He's very like intellectual, always in his thoughts, always wants to talk about all these different things. And I'm like, that doesn't apply to me or what I want to do in my life. So why do I need to think about it? That's cluttering my productive thoughts right now. And so that's probably, I feel like on a daily basis, the thing that I think about the most right now in regards to the birth is trying to allow myself to be prepared that anything really can happen. And so much so that I've actually been listening to a lot of C-section stories, because I never would have considered even thinking about what could happen if I had a C-section with my first. And I'm a little bit more in touch with reality. And sometimes people have C-sections, and a lot of the times it's not what they planned, like most of the time. So I've actually been making myself listen to these stories so that I can accept that it's reality. And a lot of people that might even have a home birth planned or have a natural birth planned or even go through all the way until the very end and then still have the C-section. I'm allowing myself to hear these stories so that I can accept that no matter how much I do, that the outcome could still be different than what is my like perfect world. And I don't feel like I'm there at all. I feel like if I had a C-section, I would totally be like devastated and not know what to do with myself. But I am getting to where I can understand that things happen and they're out of your control and it's okay and it doesn't have to ruin your whole life, which is what it feels like for someone like me when your plans are interrupted, whether they're big or small. It's like a huge deal because that was your plan.
So the out of control thing, I just want to spin that a little bit to where circumstances could come up that are beyond our control that can lead to something like a C-section. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the situation is out of your control. You still should be the one who is on board with all of the discussions and all of the decisions that are being made and how everything's going to be handled. Even if it's something that you and your birth team determine there really isn't any other safe option but to go to a C-section, that maybe the circumstances that led to that, it's not in your control in the way that life isn't in our control really ever.
Right.
But that you do still have a big controlling piece in that whole thing, and that with your birth team, you guys are all discussing this together before it's getting to that point, and there is the rare case of an actual true emergency situation where they don't really have time. They have to get in there and get baby out. to save baby's life or your life. But that is so very rare. Almost all of the time that there's these C-sections happening, it's because they don't want to get to that point. They don't want to get to a point where they do have to worry about it potentially becoming an emergency, or where you have decided that you can't go on any longer. I don't think that's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
Especially this being a second pregnancy, it would be something very extreme and extremely unexpected in regard to the health of the baby or the health of you, because it's not your first time around and you had a vaginal delivery last time. You labored for days and still had a successful vaginal delivery, and still, to the point that that after it was done, even with the transfer, you still had the feeling of having a very powerful birth, of having the accomplishment of birth, the achievement of birth. To me, that signifies that you ended that birth on a very healthy, strong point, and I wouldn't expect anything different this time. Back to picturing what this birth is going to look like. One thing I want you guys to do this week before we meet next time is to compare what you're picturing for this birth with what your husband is picturing.
Okay.
Like, see what he spells out for all of this. Like, don't tell him what you're picturing.
Okay.
Just say, hey, what do you picture this birth looking like? And we'll compare that with you and your very specific times and your place and see how you guys differ.
Yes, that'll be very interesting, actually.
Yeah, it will be. It'll give each of you a lot of insight into how you operate. And just anything that's going to kind of build up that understanding about each other is going to help each of you with the different roles that you're going to have throughout the different stages of labor.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll be
excited.
Fun. The other thing I wanted to ask you a little bit more about is you said you, when you were trying to picture the birth, you said that you have a feeling for how it should be. Can you describe what that means?
Yeah. So I think ultimately, like when I picture it, it's a feeling of what for me is just my most contented state is what I'm channeling. I don't think of birth as being like this dramatic thing. Like I want it to feel just very like chill and very natural, and like we're just hanging out and having a baby. I literally imagine it being like a warm, sunny day. I love, basically May is actually one of my favorite months. So I'm really hoping this baby doesn't decide to come early because I'm due on May 9th. And I tend to love the weather. It's usually like starting to get really warm. The days are like way long after a long winter. It's very relaxing to me. It's just so energizing, but relaxing at the same time. And so I literally imagine the window or the door being cracked open, which they do have like double glass doors in the suite at the Burning Inn. It just feeling like light and bright and relaxed is the best way for me to describe it. I really love like fresh citrusy scents. So I am planning on having my diffuser packed up with like grapefruit and lemon and maybe orange essential oils. To me, that's just what's so relaxing. And I think because one of the things that's most important to me in this birth is just being able to be present and almost enjoy it and experience it more. I am building up what is the scenario in which I know I'm like the most relaxed and the most content. And I think, again, that's why late afternoon and evening for the more intense part of my labor and like actually delivering is what I imagine. Not only was it perfect for my daughter, I love the way it worked out, but those are the times where I imagine just like sitting outside thinking life is just so awesome. That's kind of where I'm at with that birth vision and the feeling that I want.
I like it. There's a lot of being present, letting go, being relaxed. So that's where you need to be going. And you definitely have an intuition that that's where you need to go for this birth.
Yeah.
Keep embracing that and keep working on that now, because it applies all the time.
Yes.
Not just in birth. The more that you're rewiring your brain to allow those things in on a day-to-day basis, the more natural it's going to come when you're in labor. You don't want to have to be thinking about it, because you don't want to have to be thinking about anything. You just want to already be the bamboo at that point.
Yeah.
So, just really noticing what you're doing now, like you have been over the last week, and you'll find that as you're noticing it, it's just going to start happening more and more unconsciously without you having to think about it.
Yeah, I like that.
So keep working on that, and then compare visions with your husband.
Yes, I'm very excited for this conversation.
Yeah. So you have your homework assignment for this week, and feeling good about that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it was great talking to you again today for session number 2, and I look forward to seeing what we hear for session number 3.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
All right.
Thanks, Kristen.
Bye, Starre. Thank you so much for listening to this coaching session. If you would like to be considered for a coaching call on this podcast, visit naturalbirthcompass.com/podcast. Fill out our questionnaire, including your contact info, and I will be in touch. Finally, if you want to show our amazing guest some love for being vulnerable on this show and allowing us all to learn along with her, leave a comment or a review for this podcast, or share it with someone you love who will benefit as well. Need to reach me? Find me on the socials at Natural Birth Compass or visit the website naturalbirthcompass.com. See you again next time on your journey to birth.